Waiter insulted Keanu Reeves in a luxury restaurant, not knowing. He owns the restaurant. The night was alive with the soft hum of conversation, the gentle clinking of fine silverware against porcelain plates, and the occasional pop of a champagne bottle being uncorked. Inside one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city, wealthy patrons dined under golden chandeliers, their laughter mixing with the smooth jazz playing in the background. The atmosphere exuded class, elegance, and exclusivity, exactly the kind of place where only the elite came to indulge in five-star cuisine. At the far end of the dining room, a man entered quietly, dressed in a simple black blazer, a faded t-shirt, and worn-out jeans. His hair was slightly tousled, and he carried himself with an easy grace, moving with the kind of confidence that didn't need to demand attention. But despite his modest appearance, anyone paying close attention might have recognized him immediately. He was Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood legend, the man who had starred in some of the biggest movies of all time. But tonight, he wasn't here as a movie star. He wasn't here for the attention or the cameras. He was here for something else. He took a seat at a corner table, out of the way, his eyes scanning the restaurant with a quiet appreciation. To him, this place wasn't just another high-end establishment. It was personal. But as he settled in, one of the waiters, young, sharply dressed, and clearly confident in his role, approached the table with an expression that carried more than a hint of disapproval. From the moment he saw Keanu's casual outfit, his posture stiffened, his lips curling ever so slightly in irritation. To him, this was just another customer who didn't belong, a man who had somehow wandered in, unaware of the kind of place he had stepped into. With a forced politeness, the waiter handed him a menu, but there was something in his tone, something just beneath the surface, that dripped with condescension. "Sir, just so you know, this is an upscale restaurant," he said, his voice carefully measured. "Our clientele usually dresses appropriately." Keanu, ever the gentleman, simply smiled. "I see. Thanks for letting me know," he replied, his voice calm and unbothered. But the waiter wasn't finished. As Keanu flipped through the menu, the young man took a step closer, lowering his voice slightly. "I just want to make sure you're aware of the prices," he continued, his words slow, deliberate. "We serve only the finest dishes, and they can be quite expensive. Maybe this isn't the best place if you're looking for something affordable." A few nearby diners had started to notice. Some exchanged glances. Their curiosity piqued. A few whispered, trying to place the man who was being subtly insulted. But Keanu didn't react the way the waiter expected. Instead of getting flustered, instead of arguing or leaving in embarrassment, he simply nodded. "Good to know," he said, still unfazed. "I think I'll start with a glass of your best red wine." The waiter hesitated, as if debating whether to push further. But before he could say anything else, another voice cut through the air, a voice filled with authority and disbelief. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" The restaurant manager had appeared, his face pale as he took in the scene. His eyes flicked between Keanu and the waiter, and in that moment, realization dawned on him. He knew exactly who was sitting at that table. The young waiter, however, still had no idea. He straightened his shoulders, assuming the manager had come to back him up. "Oh, nothing, sir. I was just making sure our guest understands the level of service we provide here. I don't think he quite fits the usual clientele." A long silence stretched between them. And then, in a quiet but firm voice, the manager spoke words that made the waiter's confidence crumble in an instant. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" The waiter frowned, confused. The manager took a step closer, lowering his voice, but ensuring it carried enough weight for the nearby tables to hear. You just insulted the owner of this restaurant." The color drained from the waiter's face. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He turned back to Keanu, who remained as composed as ever, his expression unreadable. The energy in the room had shifted entirely. People were no longer just whispering. They were staring, waiting, anticipation thick in the air. And then, finally, Keanu leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. His eyes locked onto the now panicked waiter. His voice was soft, but it carried a quiet power. "So, do you still think I don't belong here?" The waiter's breath hitched, his mind scrambling for a response. But there was nothing he could say to undo what had just happened. And in that moment, he realized he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The waiter stood frozen, his face pale as realization set in. His heart pounded in his chest, his throat suddenly dry. The air in the restaurant felt heavier now, charged with tension as eyes from nearby tables bore into him. Moments ago, he had been so sure of himself, so certain that he was just doing his job, maintaining the exclusivity of the restaurant. But now, standing in front of Keanu Reeves, the very owner of the place he worked at, he felt like the ground beneath him had disappeared. Keanu, still calm and composed, studied the young man with an expression that was impossible to read. There was no anger in his face, no harshness in his voice, just a quiet, steady gaze that made the waiter feel even smaller. The silence stretched between them, thick and unbearable, until finally the manager spoke again, his voice tense. "I think we need to have a conversation in my office," he said, directing his words at the waiter. The young man swallowed hard, nodding quickly, but before he could move, Keanu raised a hand slightly. "Wait," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Let's not be too quick to make a decision here." The manager hesitated, confused. He had expected Keanu to demand consequences, maybe even fire the waiter on the spot. But Keanu was never the kind of person to act out of impulse or ego. He had seen enough in his lifetime, experienced both the highest peaks of success and the lowest depths of personal loss. He understood people in a way few did, and he could see something in the waiter's eyes. It wasn't just arrogance. It was fear, insecurity, maybe even desperation. The waiter finally found his voice, though it came out weak and unsteady. I didn't know," he stammered. "I had no idea who you were. I thought," he trailed off, knowing that no excuse would make up for his mistake. Keanu nodded slowly. "I know," he said simply. That much was obvious. A few guests chuckled softly, tension momentarily breaking, but the weight of the moment still loomed over them. The manager was about to speak again, but Keanu turned his attention back to the waiter. "What's your name?" The young man hesitated before answering. "Liam," he said quietly. Keanu leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest as he studied the nervous waiter. "Liam, tell me, how long have you been working here?" "About 6 months," Liam answered quickly. I'm still new." Keanu nodded. "And do you like it here?" Liam's eyes darted to the manager, then back to Keanu. He didn't know if he was being tested, or if this was some kind of trick. "I do," he said carefully. "It's a great place. I mean, the food is incredible. The service, usually, is top-notch. It's just a lot of pressure to keep up." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Pressure." Liam exhaled sharply, realizing he had already said too much. But now that the words had started spilling out, he found it hard to stop. "Yeah," he admitted. "I mean, this place attracts the richest, most powerful people. And a lot of them, well, they judge. They expect everything to be perfect. If you mess up, even a little, it can cost you. I've seen people get fired over a single bad review. So yeah, there's pressure. Keanu listened intently, nodding as if he understood. And truthfully, he did. The world Liam described wasn't so different from Hollywood, where one mistake, one bad headline, could ruin a career overnight. He had lived through it, seen it happen to others. The fear of not being enough, of being cast aside. It was real. But something else nagged at Keanu. Something beyond Liam's words. This wasn't just about pressure. There was something personal in the way the young man had spoken to him earlier. Something deeper than just enforcing restaurant policies. He decided to push a little further. You know, Keanu said, keeping his tone casual. You didn't just assume I couldn't afford to be here. You wanted me to feel like I didn't belong. Why? Liam's face flushed, and he looked away. I don't know, he muttered. Keanu didn't let up. Come on, be honest. Liam sighed, frustration flickering in his eyes. He was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of holding it all in. Because I thought you were like me, he admitted bitterly. Someone who didn't fit in here. Someone who shouldn't even be allowed past the door. Keanu's expression softened. Now they were getting somewhere. And why do you feel that way? Liam hesitated, glancing around at the wealthy guests in their tailored suits and designer dresses. He let out a hollow laugh. Because I don't belong here either, he confessed. I grew up in a tiny apartment with my mom working too, jobs just to keep the lights on. I wasn't supposed to end up in a place like this. And every day, I feel like someone's going to figure that out and kick me out for good. The room had gone quiet. Even the nearby guests who had been eavesdropping were holding their breath. The raw honesty in Liam's voice had shifted something in the atmosphere. Keanu sat forward, resting his elbows on the table. I get that, he said. More than you know. Liam frowned, confused. What do you mean? Well, you. Keanu chuckled softly. Yeah, I'm me. But before that, I was just a kid growing up without much. I didn't have connections. I didn't come from money. I was just trying to figure things out, like you. He paused before adding, and you know what I've learned. The people who act like they belong the most are usually the ones trying the hardest to convince themselves. Liam looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, he had spent so much time assuming things about people, putting them into categories, never stopping to think that maybe the man sitting in front of him understood his struggles more than anyone else in the room. Keanu leaned back, giving Liam a moment to process. Then, after a beat, he said, I'm not going to fire you, if that's what you're worried about. Liam's eyes widened. You're not. Keanu shook his head. No, but I do want you to think about something. Liam nodded quickly, ready to listen. Next time someone walks into this restaurant, don't judge them by what they wear or how they look. You never know their story, and you never know who they really are. Liam swallowed hard, nodding. He felt something shift inside him. Guilt, maybe, or the realization that he had been so focused on proving himself that he had forgotten what really mattered. The manager let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The room's energy had changed entirely. Some guests smiled knowingly, while others murmured in quiet admiration. And as Keanu finally took a sip of his wine, a small smirk playing at the corner of his lips, Liam knew this was a night he would never forget. But little did he know, the real test was yet to come. Liam stood there, his mind still spinning from what had just happened. He had expected the worst. A termination, a public humiliation, maybe even a lifetime of regret for disrespecting the very owner of the restaurant. But instead, He was given something he never expected. A lesson. A second chance. A perspective he had never considered before. As Keanu casually sipped his wine, the manager cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves, is there anything else we can do for you?" His tone had changed completely. There was no longer just respect, but a genuine concern. To make up for what had happened, Keanu shook his head, setting his glass down. "No, I'm good. Just let the kitchen know they're doing a great job." The manager nodded quickly, eager to please, and turned to Liam. "Why don't you take a break? I think you need a moment." Liam hesitated, but then gave a small nod. Before stepping away from the table, his mind was still racing, his heart still pounding in his chest. He walked past the other diners, feeling the weight of their curious stares. But he didn't care anymore. He had learned something tonight, something that went beyond just his job. He stepped into the back hallway near the staff lounge, leaning against the cool wall, letting out a slow breath. That was when he felt a presence beside him. "I meant what I said, you know." Liam turned, his breath catching when he saw Keanu standing next to him, hands in his pockets, leaning casually against the wall. Liam quickly straightened. "Mr. Reeves, Keanu," the actor corrected with a small smile. "Keanu," Liam repeated awkwardly. I don't even know what to say. I screwed up big time." Keanu shook his head. "You made a mistake, yeah, but mistakes don't define you. What you do after them, that's what matters." Liam swallowed hard, thinking about that. I don't know why I acted like that. It's not who I want to be." Keanu studied him for a moment before speaking. "You're young, you're figuring things out. But I'll tell you something. Kindness will take you a lot further than judgment ever will." Liam nodded, his throat tightening. He had spent so much of his life trying to prove he was good enough, trying to act like he belonged, that he had forgotten the one thing that mattered most: how he treated others. Keanu gave him a pat on the shoulder. "You've got potential. Liam, don't waste it on trying to impress the wrong people." Liam felt something shift in his chest, something he couldn't quite explain. He didn't just feel like an employee getting a lesson from his boss. He felt like a person, being seen for who he really was. Keanu turned to walk away, but then, as if remembering something, he paused. "Oh, and one more thing." Liam straightened, bracing himself. "Yeah." Keanu smirked. "Next time, maybe don't assume someone in jeans doesn't belong." Liam let out a breath before chuckling softly. "Yeah." Noted. Keanu nodded in approval before heading back to his table. And just like that, the moment was over, but its impact remained. Liam stood there for a few more seconds, his mind still, replaying everything. He had walked into his shift today, thinking he understood the world, thinking he knew how things worked. But he had been wrong. He straightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and walked back onto the floor, not as the same person who had started his shift, but as someone determined to do better. And as Keanu Reeves finished his meal, completely unbothered by the events of the night, he glanced around the restaurant, his restaurant, and smiled. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't just about great food, expensive decor, or exclusivity. It was about people. And tonight, one person had just learned a lesson he'd never forget. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best thing that could have happened.